All right. Our next speaker is a licensed psychotherapist and regression therapist with 25 years of experience regressing people to uncover details of their encounters with extraterrestrial beings of various types. She has counseled and regressed at least 1,800 people regarding their alien encounters. I cannot tell you how much work this is. Okay, if you've ever done hypnosis, it's something you're very committed to. It takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of time. And God knows I don't know how you do. But 1,800 people is just fantastic. Eventually, she began meeting people who she recognized as ET hybrids. She conducted an in-depth study of the hybrids who live on UFOs and those who live on Earth. She and co-author Miguel Mendonca, did I get that right? Of England, extensively interviewed 8 hybrids and wrote the book, Meet the Hybrids, The Lives and Missions of ET Ambassadors on Earth. She has also authored 2 previous books, Crop Circles Revealed and Alien Experiences. She is past president of the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists. She is on the advisory board member. She is an advisory board member of the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. She's on the editorial board of the online Journal of Abduction Encounter Research and is a professor in the International Metaphysical University. And recently, in February, she, at the International UFO Congress, and was it in Nevada? Where they have it now? Arizona. She was awarded Lifetime Achievement Award by that conference. So join me in welcoming Barbara Lamb.
Thank you, Forrest.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, great. Well, here we are at the end of this wonderful conference. Hasn't it been great? Woo! Oh, I'm so appreciative for all the conveners and all the people who've put this on, and I think it's a real privilege to be here. Also want to just acknowledge that you folks from this part of the country are just wonderful. You know, you're welcoming, you're open, you're friendly, you're courteous, you're helpful. I think every set of parents in the Midwest and the southern states, every set of parents must really make a point of raising their children, you know, to be really on the lookout for how they can assist people. I mean, it's great. I'm from Southern California for about 30 years now, Long Island, New York before that. And in both of those places, you just don't find this kind of attitude nearly as much. It's the rare individual. So good for you. I really want to commend you. I also want to commend you for being so open about the UFO, extraterrestrial, and other dimensional reality. And, you know, we talk again and again about disclosure. And I like to suggest to people that we, all of us, are the disclosure. And we don't have to wait for some official government announcement, because we are learning about it, we're experiencing it, many of us, we know it's true, and we go home, hopefully, and tell other people about this. So the more that we talk about this with people whom we encounter in our lives, the more that disclosure is happening. So each one of us, I think, are very, very important in that particular way. So today I'm going to take the subject matter that we've been talking about just another step further. So not only are we very well aware of the UFO phenomenon and the extraterrestrial beings who come in those amazing crafts, but now we, or some of us, are aware of the mixture that is happening with some people, the extraterrestrial beings mixing with, genetically mixing with some human beings. And I personally think this is a very positive thing. Well, how on earth did I get into any of this? You know, when I take a step back and I think, wow, what did a little girl from Long Island, New York, you know, with regular people, regular humans, never thinking about anything like this. How did it happen that here I am doing all this work with extraterrestrials and extraterrestrial experiencers, and now ET human hybrids? Well, I was brought up in a very traditional way, as probably many of you were. Went to a New England Ivy League college, got a very classical, wonderful education. It was a little bit different than some of my peers because I majored in philosophy, because I was wondering, okay, what is really real? What is all this? What's behind all this physical stuff that we deal with all the time? Even as a very little child, I thought, wait a minute, this can't be all there is. I didn't know what else there was. But, you know, what about this material stuff? What about dust that forms? I used to think that was very, very strange. Well, I kept wondering and sort of searching. And then in the mid-1970s, I went back to graduate school and became licensed as a psychotherapist. And that was wonderful work and still is. I still work with a lot of regular people with normal human concerns. And that psychotherapy work, I found at times was going a little bit deeper, and I didn't realize it at first, but with some people I was doing hypnosis. And then I began to travel in different countries in the early 1980s. And when I was there in Egypt and Peru, and then later China, it happened in certain locations that I suddenly had a big download, or maybe I should say an upsurge of memory of having been there in that location long ago as a different person. And these events that would happen, just sort of like rolling up like a wave on the inside of me, eventually I began to realize, gee, maybe this is coming from previous lifetimes. Maybe there really is such a thing as reincarnation, although I had never given that any serious thought before that. And as time went on, I realized that these events were spontaneous past life recalls. And then I thought, there must be a way to work with this therapeutically, that if I'm having memories from previous times, different countries, different cultures, even different races that apparently I had been, that must be true for other people too. I certainly wouldn't be the only one. So just at the right moment in my life, in 1984, I met the woman who had founded the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies, a group which went on for many years, full of excellent professional therapists who were doing past life regression therapy. And that organization, unfortunately, has just ceased existing, but it certainly served a wonderful purpose for, probably about 30 years, which was excellent. But I got 5 years of training with them of doing past life regression therapy, and was doing that here and there where it seemed appropriate in my therapy practice. And then, at the very last module of training, which was 1988, I was told by the trainer that those of us doing regression therapy work might possibly have it happen that at some time somebody might come to us who had had very unusual experiences of being visited by very unusual beings, and maybe with that sense of having been taken away for an hour or two or perhaps more, and unusual markings would be on their body when they'd come to and be back again. I don't think that trainer mentioned aliens or extraterrestrials, but I got the sense that, there must be other beings from elsewhere. So this was a real opener. I was having that sense, probably some of you have had it, that sense of cognitive dissonance, where what you thought was true suddenly collides with another truth. So I was really, wow, amazed. And not only that, but there was a big voice in my head yelling at me as if doing this, saying, "Pay attention to this, Barbara. You will be doing this." Whoa. Well, I was just blown away. And it turned out, 3 years later, after having checked out, gee, do you think there could be anything to this UFO stuff and extraterrestrials? I mean, I just had not had that on my radar screen before that. And then in 1991, one day in the shower, which is a good thinking time for me, I decided, if anyone ever should happen to come to me about that sort of experience, I think I'm ready to handle that. Yeah, I think I could deal with that. I already have done a lot of regression work. I think I could facilitate people knowing more about their experiences if they would ever want to. Well, 2 hours later, isn't the world wonderful, the way these synchronicities happen? 2 hours later, I was in a metaphysical bookstore, and the woman behind the counter recognized me and said, "Aren't you Barbara Lamb? Don't you do regression work?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "Would you please work with my 21-year-old daughter? She is so traumatized because she's having these very unusual beings of some sort, we don't know what they are, appearing in her room frequently at night, sometimes in the daytime as well. And she has a sense that she's moved and taken through the wall, and then she doesn't know what happens, but she's always returned. But she's so traumatized." So I said, "Yes, wow, isn't that interesting?" Just 2 hours ago, I was deciding I was ready for this. And she came and worked for 6 sessions with me. We did a regression each time to an extraterrestrial encounter. And on this 7th session, she came in all sort of light and cheerful, and she said, "Guess what? I've decided that I am honored, I am privileged to be part of this large program, whatever it is, with these other beings. I don't know exactly where they come from, but they certainly don't come from here. And they have been doing all kinds of things with me. They've even healed me of a bad ear infection. They even somehow presented me on one occasion with a very strange-looking child who didn't look entirely human. And she'd had a big gamut of these experiences. And she had, before that session, been healed of some pretty severe lower back pain by being followed in the car. She was driving with her sister who was a witness, and they had been driving along. This is in Southern California. And they noticed that there was a big blue light coming through the back window of the car and filling up the car, and the motor started to sort of peter out and slow down, and they pulled off the road. That light was still there, so they kind of felt scared, like, what is this? This was at dusk time, so they could see the light quite well. And there happened to be a field there. They ran across the field trying to get away from this strange light. And then she felt that the light was hitting her on the lower back area where she had had considerable back pain for quite a while. And it felt so good. She just stopped running. Her sister kept running. And she stopped and, oh, whoa. Oh gosh, that feels good. And she felt after a little while that pain, which had been there for so long, that pain was completely gone, and it never came back. So eventually they got back in the car, and the motor started up again, and they went on in whatever they were going to do. So that was a really great beginning for me in this part of my work, which I had certainly never expected to be doing. Well, that was the beginning, as I say, and since then there have been at least 1,700, probably 1,750 people who've come for regressions to their unusual experiences. And honestly, I feel I am the most privileged person in the world, that I get to assist them and to know about these things. Well, as time went on, there were more and more people, as you know, coming to me, and by 1994, I realized that one person after the other was saying, gee, do you know anybody else who's having these extraterrestrial experiences, and could I meet them? Could I talk to them? And I realized at that time there were 17 people, all in my area of Southern California, 17 people who were having these experiences and doing regressions. And so I thought, oh, well, that would be interesting to get them together. Some of them seemed to really want that. So we started what I called an experiencer support group. And that group is still going. It started in 1994. We're still meeting once a month. Isn't that great? And not only that, but at some of the conferences, which by that time I was speaking in, I realized that here are all these people for UFO conferences, and some of them, in fact, probably many of them, were having these extraterrestrial encounters. And maybe they would benefit from groups of sharing about this. So I convinced the International UFO Congress to have experiencer support groups, which I conducted for many years, and they are still holding those, and so are some of the other UFO conferences, I'm happy to see. So anyway, this is very good work, that if you're an experiencer of this sort of thing, you probably would really find it beneficial and very welcoming to speak to somebody else who's having these unusual experiences. So that's a real service, I consider, when people get to do that. So as time has gone on in doing this extraterrestrial work, it came out many, many, many times that women were having eggs taken from their ovaries, and men were having sperm taken, and that later on they would be aware that they had hybrid children. They'd be actually introduced on board the UFOs to their hybrid children. Sometimes they would be really, really shocked and not like that thought at all. But other times, with some of these people, men and women, that they really felt some affection even for these children, even these babies who looked quite different than we do. They looked sort of human, and yet sort of not human. Anyway, there was a tremendous mixture of responses that humans had to having hybrid children. Some are very positive about it. In fact, there is a group now called the Hybrid Children Community, and there's a website that has a lot of information called hybridcommunity.com, and hybridchildrencommunity.com, if you want to look that up and find out some interesting information, and a lot of drawings and paintings of some of these hybrid children at different ages. So for years, I became more and more aware of the hybrids who are living on the ships. They're not human enough to be living here on Earth for a variety of reasons. They wouldn't tolerate the viruses and bacteria the way that we do reasonably well most of the time. And they wouldn't look normal enough from human standpoints. And so they would have a tough time getting along and being accepted. So they usually live on the ships for their whole lives, or maybe on another planet that their species came from. So that was just one of these running aspects of the whole phenomenon as far as I was concerned, the hybrids living on the ships. But then a few years ago, I met a wonderful, wonderful woman named Cynthia Crawford. You will be seeing a picture of her. Cynthia Crawford from Arizona. And the circumstances were so cute. I thought that at lunchtime at that UFO Congress, I was putting mayonnaise or something on a sandwich, and somebody came up beside me, so I glanced to see who it was. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, these big, bigger than usual, beautiful eyes. And I sort of did a double take, and she said, "What?" And I said, "Well," and quickly edited, "Okay, maybe it's okay to say this because this is a UFO conference." So I said, "Well, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but you remind me of a hybrid." You know, gulp, uh-oh, what's going to happen? Is she going to feel insulted? And she said, with a big smile, "I am a hybrid." So that was the beginning, for me, of knowing a real ET human hybrid living here perfectly well and serving wonderfully here on Earth. So, of course, we made a point of getting to know each other. It was about 2 years after that, at another UFO conference, that someone brought a woman over to meet me, and I talked to that person who brought her over. And then I looked at this woman who was brought to meet me, and again I did a double take. I'm sure I actually jolt when these things happen. And she said, "What?" And I said, "Well, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you remind me of a mantis being." And she leaned forward. I was at the vendor table. She leaned forward and she said, "Good for you. I am a mantis being. I'm from planet Estegan," which I had not heard of before then. So we then had lunch together, and eventually she spent a whole week with me, and I was really observant. You know, now what is it? I mean, is she really different? Yeah, she was. I mean, she looks like a regular human being. And why I had that sudden knowing that not only was she a hybrid, but specifically a mantis hybrid, I don't know. It just happened. So she had all kinds of psychic abilities and intuitions and perceptions of beings, little, lizards and hummingbirds and insects and things in my garden, things that I didn't see until she pointed them out, and I had pretty good eyesight then. But anyway, so that was the second hybrid. Then I began to realize, there must be more hybrids living on Earth. There couldn't just surely be two. And so I began to realize at some of these conferences through other people who would come to me that, oh, there's another one. Oh, yeah. Oh, here's another one. Wow. And these seem to be really such likable, wonderful people. And I got to know somebody who's in Kentucky. We did a lot of emailing and phone calls. I never actually met her in person, and she turned out to be a reptilian ET human hybrid. And so it just kind of went on from there. So continuing on with this work, which I'm still doing very happily, last spring, just about this time, in April, I received a phone call from a man in England. His name is Miguel Mendonça. He was a researcher and a writer. He'd already published 5 books and sounded very articulate and intelligent and very nice. And he had seen some talk that I had given. He'd seen it on YouTube, and he'd been thinking a lot about ET human hybrids. And then he found my talk, and he thought, gee, maybe I can learn a lot from her. So, because he was thinking of writing a book by himself on that subject. And we talked on the phone a few times, very long conversations. And then he said, why don't we collaborate and write the book together? So we did that, the book Meet the Hybrids. So anyway, it's been a great adventure for the past year, getting to know 8 hybrids whom we've really featured in depth in this book. And each person has had a chance to not only ask a whole battery of questions that we had for each of them, but they've also been given a whole chapter to tell their own story about their mixtures of ET and their own human component, and how they got to be that way, and what it is that's different about them, and primarily why they are here. And to Miguel and myself, it was really inspiring to hear all this and to know them. So life has gone on very much involved with the hybrids. So each one of them, I will just say very quickly, are very, very benevolent. You'd be happy to know them. And probably you do know some. Probably some people in this audience could be hybrids and either know it fully or not know it, or eventually might come to know it. But basically, these hybrids whom we know are here totally for service to humanity. And they're wonderful, bright, likable, talented people. I think that there is an increasing amount of curiosity about hybrids in the general public. I mean, here and there, I hear somebody talking about it, and more interest certainly in the UFO community. And there are many different assumptions about hybrids. And some people say, oh, sure, well, we were hybridized, all of us, humans, were hybridized long, long ago, probably many thousands of years ago. And some other people say, oh, that's impossible. Other species couldn't possibly combine with us successfully. And a lot of people say, okay, where's the proof? I can't tell you how many times I've been asked about DNA testing. Well, have they been DNA tested? And even a lot of my good friends at home who are not involved in this phenomenon, just don't find any interest in it, even they immediately will say, oh, well, have they been tested for their DNA? Well, there are some problems. We've really looked into that possibility of having the hybrids tested, but there are some objections that come forth. One of our hybrids found out that when you have DNA tested, and according to her, no matter which lab or which group does the testing, the results are mandated to be sent immediately to a particular department of our government. And they look through, they search through for details. And they may keep those results. And in some cases, this hybrid had heard, the results are not even given back to the person whose genetics were being tested. So that was not very reassuring. And there was some fear that was developing that, gee, if this, whatever this group was, part of the government, that if they knew that, oh, this is somebody who has very unusual genetics, maybe we want to really investigate that person, or maybe even dissect that person. So nobody, of course, wants to have that happen. And then, of course, there's a whole thing that, I'm sure that our geneticists do not have a lineup of, okay, this is reptilian DNA, and this is Arcturian, and this is Andromedan, this is Pleiadian, etc. Maybe they do have that, but we certainly don't know about it if they do. And so they do know that there's a lot of what they call junk DNA, and maybe the hybrids have more of a proportion of junk DNA. We don't know that for sure, but still that doesn't really say very much. So we seriously wonder if it's worth having genetic testing done. I heard on a regular standard radio interview just a few days ago something very, very interesting. It was all focused on genetic mixing. And in this case, it wasn't talking about extraterrestrials, but talking about different human races, cultures, groups, intermingling and mating together and producing offspring. And it has been found through apparently extensive study that when these different kinds of groups, racial or cultural, national groups, are mixed together, that the offspring tend to be smarter, taller, considered more attractive, more active, more athletic, more talented, more virile, with greater longevity, therefore more healthy, more fertile, and with more natural immunities, and even this investigator said more symmetry. Symmetry in a person's appearance is considered by humans to be more attractive. And then the report went on to say that 1 in 10 human babies born today are of mixed human races. And we have no idea how many are of extraterrestrial mixtures. So anyway, that information is in a book called Breeding Between the Lines. That cute? The updated edition by a man named, well, I could only hear it phonetically on the radio, Azan Zib, I think, Breeding between the lines. So I thought that was interesting, especially since I was getting ready to give this talk about ET human hybrids. So my conclusions about ET human hybrids are really, really different than the conclusions drawn by a well-known researcher, Dr. David Jacobs. And I've known David Jacobs since 1993 or 1994, even though he's in Philadelphia and I'm in Southern California. But we're together at these different kinds of events and share ideas and information. And his conclusion is that the ET human hybrids are part of a very sinister, clandestine program by the extraterrestrials, that they are creating hybrids between their species and humans who grow up on the ships, but then at a certain point they're left here on the earth to get apartments and whatever, and to live here among humanity, and eventually with the aim of taking over humanity. So it's very clandestine, not very reassuring, I think. In my opinion, pretty creepy. But anyway, that's what he is concluding because of the particular people who have come to him. In fact, he thinks that the whole abduction phenomenon, or I would say ET encounter phenomenon, is all for the purpose of creating hybrids who are here to subversively take over humanity. So let's get this straight right now, that that's the polar opposite point of view of my point of view, that at least my exposure has been these hybrids who are here are totally here out of sacrifice, out of service to help humanity, help upgrade the consciousness of humanity. So what a difference that is. And it could be, of course, that both of those kinds of hybrids are happening. I just don't know. I know that we have a very different take on it. So the hybrids whom I know, who are featured in this talk and in the book Meet the Hybrids, these are goodwill ambassadors from their ET species that they are part of to humanity. They consider themselves bridges between their ET species and humanity. And they're here to preserve life on Earth, to help us to do that, and to enhance human life on Earth. They do this partly by raising our frequencies, as well as raising our consciousness. One of them, Jacqueline, said, just our being here with a mixture of that other species or those other species, some of them have more than one in them, just our being here without even doing anything helps to raise the frequencies of humanity. And they do this in not a braggadocio way, it's just a very modest way, that's their understanding about it all. And they are trying to help us to evolve into a finer, better way of life. They're trying to help us to, as individuals and as a collective humanity, and even as a whole planet, to evolve into at least the fifth dimension of reality. And they actually offer us various techniques and approaches for doing that. Many people call this ascension. So they call it evolving, raising, ascending, and probably many of you have been hearing about ascension from other sources. So they're here totally for benevolent services, and in a way they've really made a sacrifice for being here, because it's difficult for them to live on planet Earth in this 3D reality. So they're all living in very modest ways through teaching classes, individual guiding of people, very often physically healing people when people are requesting it, and even doing a good deal of remote healing for people who need it and know about them and request it. They're not here for any fame or fanfare or ego reasons. They just go about their service in quiet ways. They just do what they are drawn to doing. And each of them, by the way, feels more extraterrestrial than they feel human, even though they look entirely human. If you saw one of them right now, you wouldn't think, ooh, that's a weird-looking person, because they don't look weird. They just look like regular people because they have so much human in them. And they each have a sense of really deeply longing to be with their extraterrestrial family, whom they consider their true family, even though they appreciate the human mother and father whom they have. They each have expressed the idea that they want to get through with their service here and then go home to their own true species. So there are many commonalities between these 8 hybrids, and I suspect others as well. Each one of these hybrids was born to a human mother. They had a human mother and human father here on Earth. And as I said, they look like normal humans. They're not creepy or anything. And each one of them became a hybrid in a different way. And they each learned about their being a hybrid in different ways and at different ages in their lives. Some have physiological features that are a bit different than most humans. For instance, one definitely has a different bone consistency. And this was discovered during her childhood, not knowing she was a hybrid at that time, but she had a couple of broken bones, and so they went in and they thought, what's the matter with her bones? They seem to be breaking easily, and they noticed that there was a different bone consistency than the rest of us have. Some of them have different blood types. A couple of them who are part of the mantis species of the ETs, their wrists fold over. Mine won't do that very far, probably most of ours won't. But in their case, the wrist folds all the way over parallel to the forearm. And they just do it just like that. I mean, no big effort. And I've seen them do it, and I've seen them do it with each other. And that's very much like the mantis beings, the big, tall insectoid beings who have that extra arm flap. In their case, it's longer. And if you would see a praying mantis in your garden, you would notice that it has that feature. So in fact, these 2 hybrids, on one occasion, before I realized they were hybrids, they were at some sort of gathering, and they intuitively recognized the mantis beingness in each other. And they went up to each other And they called it the mantis bow. They folded their arms over like that. They called it the mantis bow or the mantis prayer, and they touched their forehead and they touched their forearms. And all of this downloading of mantis information came through. So they become fast friends, even though they live in different states. So some of them even have a different organ, which would usually be in the lower abdomen, up somewhere else, like in the higher chest area. So that certainly is different. And each of these hybrids has always, from the beginning of their lives, felt very different from other humans. And they've had a different perspective on things than any of the other humans around them. And they each express they just cannot understand why we have robberies and break-ins and shootings and killings and out-and-out murders and wars, one whole group against another, and so much killing here. Well, many of us really are puzzled by that too, but they're particularly bothered by that. It's really painful for them. And they each feel a challenge living here. For one thing, this is a 3D reality, as we know, and it's very dense compared to where some of their beings, whom they are made up of, where those beings come from. And so, because sometimes it's another dimension, or at least it's lighter in frequency. In some of those planets, they don't have nearly as much gravity. So these hybrids feel it's sort of a trudging, heavy, efforted thing to be here. And they're each aware of their own extraterrestrial lineage. Maybe took some years to become aware of that, but they've ended up with that. And there are about 15 or 16, 17, 18 different species whose genetics they have. They also each have extraterrestrial guides, and they consider those guides and the species they come from their star family. They each seem to use that particular term. Apparently, they hear that from their own beings. And they are visited frequently by their extraterrestrial guides and members of that community that they are partly made up of. They have the visits here often in their own lives, and also when they are taken on the ships. So they have frequent abductions, but they don't call them abductions because they are very welcomed by them. It's a happy experience. They call it just a privileged encounter to be with their own kind, their own real families. And most of them turn out to be a mixture of more than one extraterrestrial species. And these hybrids are all very sensitive to frequencies around them. Like if we had some of them sitting here in the room, they would be really, really tuned in to the frequencies of this crowd. Fortunately, they feel that when they're with a crowd of people at a UFO type of gathering, such as this, that frequency is more likely to feel good and feel familiar to them. But when they're out in just almost any kind of human crowd for any reason, it's just a discordant feeling of frequency for them, and often quite exhausting. Each of these hybrids also has very special abilities and skills. For instance, each one of them is highly psychic and, of course, very intuitive. Most of them are really good at telepathic communication. I mean, they can pick up each other's thoughts and pick up the rest of our thoughts and pick up the thoughts of the ET beings as well. And they know that their thoughts are known by those beings. And I mean, for us, I think most of us probably don't do that, or we're not sure if we've been accurate if we think we do a little bit of it, but they're really, really good at it. They also have these healing skills, and each one of them does a great deal of healing of other people, and some of them do healing of animals and even plant forms. They're reviving plants just with their healing skills. So some of them call it Reiki healing. One person calls it color and sound healing. Another hybrid calls it light language healing. There are a lot of characteristics in common between them with their healing. And then some of them are particularly good animal communicators. Some of them even feel more comfortable with animals than with human beings. They also each have the ability to do astral travel and have frequent astral trips. Many of us do too, on occasion or in our sleep at night, but they do just any time. It just happens sometimes, and sometimes they choose to have a little astral excursion. Some of them do bilocation. This is something so often I wish I could do. Because there are two things I really want to do at the same time in different places. Any of you have that wish? Oh, gee, I wish I could be there too. Well, these people can do this on occasion, the bilocating. And some of them make a point of teaching people how to heal themselves, which of course is a great service. And they have the ability to see other dimensional beings. For instance, when we were doing some of these Skype interviews, thank goodness for Skype. It's wonderful. You can feel like you're almost right there with the other person. So Miguel Menanza and I, and one hybrid at a time, would have these long 3.5, 4.5 hour Skype sessions, completely oblivious to the amount of time going on. We were just so engaged and fascinated in what we were learning and experiencing. And on a few occasions, the hybrid being interviewed on Skype could see beings, for instance, around and behind me and describe them. So on one of these interviews on Skype, I was sitting there just feeling regular, and after a while I began to feel that somebody had come into the room, that sort of feeling of presence, even though I hadn't heard anything. And so I was just aware of that. It seemed like there were some other people behind me, but I didn't say anything because we were doing the interview. And then that one particular hybrid said, "Barbara, I'm seeing 3 tall blue Arcturians standing behind you, and one of them has his hand on your right shoulder where I had been feeling some extra pressure." So I really think that she was able to see these beings, which I couldn't see, but I could feel them. I could believe that they definitely were there. And some of them do channeling of higher beings and channeling of extraterrestrial beings. Some of them even bring through messages from deceased people, deceased loved ones. I always think that is a really magnificent service. And some of them do shape shifting into their other form, their extraterrestrial form. There are quite a few examples of that. With one of them, Cynthia, by the way, I'm mentioning these names, but you will see them in a little while here. I was talking to Cynthia at a conference this past fall, and just regular, looking in her eyes and talking, nice casual conversation. And after a while, I began to realize that her pupils were no longer round. Her irises no longer round. They were elongated, like vertical slits. And so I interrupted her and said, Cynthia, are you aware that your eyes have just changed? And they actually changed into the reptilian component that she has in her. Benevolent reptilians, fortunately, so she welcomes them. And she said, no, I wasn't aware that they were changing, but I was feeling a kind of pressure there in my eyes. I've seen that with another woman, too, whom I don't know if she's a hybrid, and that was years ago when I was on a trip to Bali, Indonesia, talking to another American woman, and just absolutely, this is before I'd ever even heard of such a thing. And I was just, wow. Just watching these eyes change. And she apparently wasn't aware of it at all. Another one of our hybrids, Julie, has on occasion had a full body change visually right in front of somebody else into her reptilian self. So one night she was at a conference and she was sharing a room with a female roommate, and the roommate came in a little bit later to the room and looked over at Julie and noticed, oh my gosh, there's a reptilian there in bed. Now she had the covers over a good part of it, so she couldn't see the whole body, but she could see that the shape was different, and she looked more closely, and she could see with this sleeping being, see that it really was Julie. There was something about the reptilian face that still looked like Julie. And then she went to bed. She figured, oh, I guess it's safe. She seems to be okay, and she's not bothering me. So she went to sleep. And in the next morning, first thing she do when she woke up was look over and see that Julie was back into her normal human aspect again. Charmaine, one of our wonderful hybrids from England, she got the final confirmation that she was a hybrid by having an experience, a spontaneous experience, where she shifted completely full body into her reptilian self. Again, reptilians, there are lots of different species of reptilians, I have come to realize, and she's part of that reptilian race that's very friendly and helpful, safe, non-intruding, and so forth, and she's happy to be one of those, actually. And so this shape-shifting happened, and it was witnessed, and then she thought, oh good, I finally have the confirmation, because for years she had been thinking, why am I so different? What is it about me? Why do I really see things differently than anybody else does whom I know? And when she had the visit from her reptilian beings, that's when, maybe with their help, that's when she shapeshifted into reptilian. And she said she was so relieved fantastic. Now she knew. In fact, this is true of all of these hybrids, that they had wondered what was going on. They'd wondered for years, why am I having these visits with these other kinds of beings? Why am I being taken away here and there? Why do I like these beings? Why do I not object to this going on? Why do I feel like them? Even though here I am, a person, a human being. And so each one had expressed that when they finally found out in their own way, getting this validation that they are hybrids, it was a wonderful moment, a wonderful relief for them, something which they completely accepted. So Robert, one of our male hybrids, he lives in California, he is partially mantis being, and he found just a very few years ago that even though he's a normal height for a human man, that he was being slowly stretched. All of his limbs were being stretched right here on Earth as a human. Both of them, and the legs are being stretched, and his whole torso and his neck were being stretched. In fact, it really grew quite painful, as you can imagine. And he then realized that he was part mantis being, and because it was painful and causing some difficulties, he had to tell that group of beings, that's enough. I can't take it. The human body just can't do that kind of stretching and elongating, and they honored that, and they stopped it, thank goodness. So each of these hybrids offers a different kind of service, or multiple services in being here and helping. They're teaching classes, they're teaching workshops, they're doing individual coaching, they're doing healing, as I mentioned, Reiki healing, remote healing, light language healing. They're teaching people to heal themselves. They're teaching people to use visualization to manifest the outcome they want. I suspect some of us do that here. I know I do, without having known about these beings before. They are doing a lot of inspiring of people in their spiritual understanding and spiritual growth. They're helping people to know about their own ET lineage and ET incarnations. I had suspected for years leading up to knowing these hybrids, I had been suspecting that many of us, maybe all of us, I don't know, have had plenty of incarnations as various types of extraterrestrials in our previous lifetimes. And I was finding every now and then in doing a past life regression, in fact, I discovered this way back in the 1980s, that occasionally somebody would have a past life experience come up in regression in which they were an extraterrestrial being coming to Earth. Not coming to Earth as a hybrid, but as an ET, and in some cases they, for one way or another, kind of got stuck here and died here. That was pretty impressive. And so one of them teaches a certain form of dancing for energizing and for uplifting of spirit. And they all do quite a lot of listening to people. In other words, counseling. And they help people to, what they say, stay in their own power. This is something, by the way, that is encouraged by the hybrids when they're talking to people who have extraterrestrial encounters, that if the person doesn't want to have an extraterrestrial encounter that's already beginning, these hybrids encourage them to stand in your own power and say no if you really mean no. Say go away if you really mean go away. Or stand in your own power if you're willing to go along with the experience to learn from it, even grow from it. So that seems to be an important theme. And they do a lot of helping of regular human beings to recognize their own purpose in their lives, their own mission. And it's probably true that all people have some kind of purpose of being here in this particular lifetime, and some have out-and-out missions that they want to be accomplishing. And a couple of them do a lot of communicating with animals and doing readings, like psychic readings, about other people's pets, other people's animals. And some of them even track lost animals. They do it psychically. And that's wonderful work for the owners of those animals and the animals themselves. And many of them do channeling, bringing through very special guidance for people. Some of them even give nutritional advice, which seems to be very wise. Some of them do life coaching. Some of them do what they call angel attunements. And Robert, whom I mentioned before, is developing what he calls two-dimensional and three-dimensional consciousness amplifying techniques. And he's hoping to get that perfected and put up on our website sometime soon. Some do past life readings through the Akashic records. One lady, Jacqueline, does what she calls star origin readings. So she can look at a person. She did this for me. She did it for Miguel. She can look at the person and clairvoyantly see how or where they first incarnated way back, whenever that was, long time ago. And like for me, she could see that my first few incarnations were not in any kind of physical form, but they were in what she called the celestial realms, very akin to what the soul is anyway, as a spiritual being. And then she could see incarnations as different types of beings whom we would call extraterrestrial, including some dolphin-like beings, including some beings that were just like bursts of light, and several incarnations as mantis beings. And when she said each one of these, I couldn't help but just burst forth with, oh, that's why I've had those experiences where I'm just a burst of light, or that's why I had to keep going back to Hawaii and swimming right with the dolphins in the open ocean, which I did for about 6 years fairly recently. And that's why I've always loved the mantis beings. Above all the other extraterrestrial beings I've been coming into awareness of, I've identified with those. So that sort of thing is wonderful that she can see that for people. Some of them do soul recovery, when part of the soul has split off during a person's traumatic experience. Some of them even receive messages from deceased animals, particularly beloved pets who have died. And some of them teach people to do astral travel. They each became a hybrid in different ways. for Cynthia, she discovered when she was age 30, actually her father is the one who told her. Her father, by the way, had been part of a particular incognito group, something to do with the military and the government. And they knew he was a military man, but they didn't know what he was involved in. And he's part of a group that was experimenting with creating ET human hybrids. So on one occasion, he actually drugged his wife, that's Cynthia's mother, and she was not pregnant at that time, but in that drug state, she was taken by humans who participate in this clandestine program, and they already had an embryo that they had created from the mother's eggs and the father's sperm, and two types of extraterrestrials whom they were secretly working with and had the material from. And they created that little embryo, and in that clandestine abduction, they inserted that embryo into the womb. That embryo grew into full term and was delivered the normal way, and that was the hybrid we know of as Cynthia. And Jacqueline, another hybrid, came from parents and grandparents who used to be mantis ETs before they were humans. And when the mother was pregnant with Jacqueline, some tall, white Zeta ETs implanted ET DNA into the fetus, Jacqueline, who was already there. And that fetus then had a combination of ET races and her parents, and also some genetic material from another hybrid man who was already living here on Earth. And Jujuli, we call her Juju for short. And Jujuli, by the way, is a name given by her extraterrestrials. It's considered her spiritual name. So at age 6, here she was born regular baby, regular way that we all do it. And when she was age 6, she was taken by the beings, and they inserted, through an injection type of device, they inserted their DNA directly into her. That's how she became a hybrid. And with Charmaine, this beautiful woman from England, her mother had been told, after having a couple of children, that she would no longer be able to have any more children. And then some procedure was used by extraterrestrials to facilitate her conception of Charmaine. And Charmaine got confirmation of being a hybrid when her extraterrestrial visitors, her reptilian visitors, actually helped her to change into her reptilian self, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Vanessa, another one of our hybrids, was when in her mother's womb, her mother was taken onto a craft, and Vanessa, the little fetus already in the womb, was embedded with what she called ET galactic coding. And then 3 others of our hybrids in our study were injected with ET DNA when they were in their mother's wombs. I found this out from one of my clients, a woman I had worked with in regressions for 11 years. And in one of them, in one of the regressions, we found that she, when pregnant with twins, was taken on board one particular night, and the ET female by her side, when she was lying on a table, was feeling her abdomen, apparently went past the first twin fetus, and then paused over the second one and said, this is the one we want, and proceeded to inject through the wall of the abdomen, the wall of the womb, into that fetus these extraterrestrial genetics. So that was years before, when we did this regression, years before I ever even knew about hybrids. But so that boy, I am convinced, is a hybrid who is very, very different than his twin brother right from the very beginning. And so there were some other theories about that too. So they each have a mission to carry out. They're really here for a purpose. It isn't just out of curiosity of, gee, I guess I'll just experience what it's like to be a human. It's much more than that. It's very dedicated that they are here. So they each have an individual mission, but there are some key themes amongst them that they share in regard to their missions. They're all here to help humanity be aware of the reality of extraterrestrial beings. And they're here to help humanity be aware of the multitude of extraterrestrial beings. I think it's very easy to hear about a very few types of ET beings and think that that's it. But there's an enormous panoply. I have no idea what the total number would be of not only extraterrestrial beings, but the beings who come here on some occasions. And they're here to help us be aware of interdimensional beings as well. And they're here to help us be aware of various dimensions of reality, different frequencies. So they're here, as I said earlier, to be a bridge between humans and extraterrestrials, and to educate humans about extraterrestrials, hopefully to make us more open to the idea about extraterrestrials and more open to knowing them. Many people whom I know who think they do not experience ever extraterrestrial contacts, many of them say, oh, how can I get them to take me? Do any of you identify with that? That maybe you don't think that you're having contact, but you'd really like to? Yeah, I hear some yeses, thank you. Anyway, I've met a lot of people along the way who really would like to do that. And apparently, that's possible if you meditate very sincerely and ask. Some people have even gone outside, to observe the skies, hoping to see a craft. And if they're really, really meaning it and really asking for it, I have known it to happen, that a craft will come near, a being will be there, and they will have an encounter. And in those cases, it always turns out to be a very positive encounter. Different, yes, but positive. So they are here to foster a whole sense of connection between us all. One of the things that's painful for the hybrids being here is that everyone seems to consider themselves separate from everyone else, even the people they're the closest to. I'm an individual and you're an individual. We're all these separate individuals sitting here. But they say, no, we are all one. And we humans are maybe the least likely to ever understand that. Sad, isn't it? But maybe we can learn from them. That's the good part. They're here to foster self-empowerment, enlightenment, liberation, inspiration, healing, raising consciousness, protection of what is good here, caring for people and for animals and for the earth. So some ET genetics work better than others, it seems, when combined with humans. For instance, the insectoid species, which seems to, according to some, include certain types of greys and mantis beings, that being an insectoid basic species, their genes are not as compatible with us, a mammalian species. I guess that's pretty obvious to see. So insectoid hybrids can be somewhat weaker in muscles, weaker immune systems, and could have, I think this isn't true in all cases, but could have smaller, more frail bodies. However, anybody with the insectoid mixture tends to be very intelligent and have many psychic abilities and very loving natures, that unconditionally loving type of person. And then, on the other hand, the reptoid species seems to be a much better mix with human DNA, because humans already have some reptilian DNA in us, reptilian aspects. We may not look like that, but we have the brain stems, we have the precursor for tails at the end of our spines. We may not think of it that way, but X-rays very often show that. We have that reptilian type of response, that fight or flight response very easily. And so hybrids with reptilian aspects in them tend to be more strong and more healthy, more athletic. They live longer lives. But they may also have more ego, and they may have strong emotions, especially some strong negative emotions, as well as positive emotions. So this particular study I'm referring to says the best DNA mixture for humans is with other humanoid species, such as the Pleiadians and the Nordics. But the others are workable. And there are mixtures of higher dimensional beings with humans as well, such as the ones we call blue Arcturians, Sirius B beings, fifth dimensional beings. And many ET species have serious engineering programs beyond the species, the hybrids that I'm telling you about. This seems to be very common amongst many extraterrestrial groups to produce hybrids. So I'm going to be running on here. I want to be sure to show you some pictures, but I do want to mention a little bit about the guides, that each hybrid has a very helpful guide, or more than one guide, and these usually tend to be extraterrestrial beings. So many of these guides tend to be part of the hybrid's star family, those ETs out there whom they are from. And the ETs whose genetics they have in them tend to be the guides, and the type of beings that they were in previous lifetimes when they were extraterrestrials. So each hybrid might have a mixture of guides, not just one. And the guides are sometimes angelic, celestial beings, or the ETs that they were composed of, or they are also guides sometimes for other human beings, not just for the hybrids. And sometimes there are animal guides who are not in this dimension, but communicate with them and are very helpful. And so each hybrid has his own level of conscious connection with his guide and with his star family. And sometimes, like some of us do, they ask for help from their guides and they receive it. And sometimes their guides are observing the hybrid in his life and they initiate contact. They offer assistance. Sometimes they even offer healing. And these hybrids say that we all have guides anyway, whether we're aware of it or not, and that we can always ask for support or help or guidance from our guides when we need it. And that when we're sincere and we really ask with a sincere heart, that we will receive that help. It may happen in a very subtle way that suddenly we know what to do. We may not hear a booming voice, but just suddenly, okay, I know what to do now. That's the solution. So it could be subtle or it could be more dramatic. So it's been a wonderful experience interviewing these hybrids for Miguel Mendonça and myself. Each time we got on Skype with one of them, it was just like, wow, aren't we fortunate to get to know these people and hear it. It was all so spontaneous. It was all so given. And the hybrids themselves were very happy to have someone to talk to who would receive what they said, because they so often in their lives felt so different from and so misunderstood by the rest of the people around them. They were really happy, as several of them said in their own way, happy to have a platform for getting their information out, getting that whole point of view, letting more humans know about the reality. And these hybrids, by the way, surely must be all over the world. They're not just here in the United States. And they would all love to have an opportunity to get together with many, many more hybrids. And with the star children, the starseed adults, the crystal children, the indigo children, those who seem to be really inspired to be here to help, seem to have connections with the others from elsewhere. So I'm going to start showing some pictures now so you have more of a sense of what we're talking about. This is the title of our book. And this is Miguel Mendonça, 42-year-old man in England, a wonderful, wonderful human being. It has been just such a delight and privilege and fascination to get to know him, and all of our hybrids just love him dearly. And that's myself. And this is the cover of our book, which is downstairs in the exhibit hall. I'll be there right after this lecture. And these are the names of the hybrids. Grant Cameron, by the way, who's a wonderful, wonderful high consciousness and yet very practical UFO researcher, wrote the foreword, which we appreciated very much. And so one of the hybrids is Tatiana Amore. She's from England. Cynthia Crawford, some of you may know her. She does the ET sculptures. She's in Arizona. Charmaine de Rosario Sech is from England. Robert Fullington from Northern California. Julie Kita is also from the Phoenix, Arizona area. Vanessa Lamorte is in Las Vegas. Jacqueline Smith in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. And Matthew Thomas, he's our most recently self-identified hybrid, age 28, and he is in England. So here's a picture of Jacqueline Smith doing what she loves the most, which is communicating with animals. And she goes out and takes walks. Apparently she lives near the edge of Columbus, Ohio, and she takes walks in the woods and along the river, and she really communicates with the squirrels and the birds and the insects and the lizards, and in the woods with deer or with whatever animals she comes across with, of course, dogs and cats as well. And what a lovely, wonderful human being who is also a hybrid she is. And this is one of her beings, a tall, bluish Arcturian being. And she apologized for her lack of artistic ability, but that's according to her. But so many of these beings do have very, very large, dark eyes that are very penetrating, very wise, and she experiences this being as a very benevolent being. And this is one of the higher celestial beings, pinkish, more sort of amorphous looking, still extraterrestrial, although in a different dimension. And she has wonderful, very inspiring encounters with this one. And then also another blue type, I don't know what the name of this species is, but from her point of view, they're all very wonderful and very kindly. And Jacqueline has done some writing that she was inspired to do, some of their symbols, some of their writing symbols. And she finds herself doing that quite a bit, the way that some of us may doodle when we're on the telephone or whatever. And she realizes that these little drawings that she does really come from some of her star beings. And this is a particular code, a code sequence from her Arcturian beings. And she knows what this is. She just draws them, and she has a sense of knowing what they mean as she's doing the drawing. It's another form of their transmitting information to her. She also has encounters with a being she calls Quabar. And she said it's not what we would normally think of as an extraterrestrial being. And it's sort of made up of a grouping of different aspects, different colors and shapes. And it's always sort of morphing, amoeba-like, sort of in and out, expanding, contracting, shifting positions, but it's very, very conscious, and she gets a lot of messages from this Quabar being. So now we have Vanessa. This is the young woman who lives in Las Vegas, and of all places, how well placed that Las Vegas, what is it, George Knapp says, the capital of Sin City, I don't know, he just goes on. And but she's there doing wonderful spiritual work and really helping people in Las Vegas. And she has an artist friend who took her very specific descriptions of her beings, and this is one of them. And as with some of these people, they know the beings, they have a lot of contact with them, but they don't necessarily have a name. People say, oh, who's that? I mean, what type of being? Well, in many cases, I can't tell you. Maybe they could. And then this lovely being. Some of them definitely look a little bit more human-like, But these are the beings that she not only has contact with, but she has some of the genetics of. Now here's one I had never heard of, camelopardian being. And it looks, well, no, I'm sorry. This is a Pegasian, like Pegasus, a Pegasian species being who looks rather horse-like, don't you think? A very wise, feminine being. And this, she says, is her hybrid son. She may very well have more than one hybrid children, but this is her son. Look at those luminous eyes. She said they really are like that. Looking into those eyes is a transforming experience. And then this fellow who really looks different. She has experiences with beings whom I'm not familiar with from all the work I've done in this. And some of them in these pictures look rather formal and stern. She experiences them as being very helpful and unconditionally loving. This is the one, I think, who is the camelopardian being. Have you ever heard of them before? I hadn't. And they're very wonderful beings. And this one who actually looks a lot like this hybrid Vanessa, I think. And she always has blue hair, but looks quite human. Now we're going on to Robert Fullington. Just a delightful young man. He's one of the ones who lives in Northern California. And he has wonderful artistic ability. He did this mantis being himself, and you can see the fold over wrists and forearms, sort of the extra forearm there. And of course the big eyes. Many people see these mantis beings and they have the same features. He also has other kinds of beings, like this one, who has a ball of light here, a healing light. I don't know the name for this species. And by the way, of course, we humans like to name everything, don't we? Everything. Every little species and subspecies and object possible. And a lot of these species, I have learned, don't. They don't have to name things because they're so telepathic that they don't even name each other. They just know. They know each other. And I mean, what a difference. Different way of living, for sure. Anyway, here's, whoops. Oh my goodness. There we go. Here is a rendition of Robert himself with this being. You see, he's got his hands around the top of his head, and he is in a healing session, some with this healing light here, and some with healing coming through the hands of these beings. And this was a small, short being who showed up in the doorway of his room one night. And, you know, when he was a child, I would say he was not comfortable waking up at night, as millions of people aren't, seeing an unusual being. But he came to know this being and realized after a while he not only was okay to have encounters with, but he was wonderful to have encounters with. He wanted to show too that there were these anomalous lights that he saw on the road one night in California. This one was moving, and orbs, another little tiny orb up here. And being an experiencer, like most experiencers, they very often see things like that. And this is a house in his area, and he particularly was interested in that little streak which was probably like an orb that is moving and therefore looks more elongated. And sometimes he sees streaks of light, even with striping in them. And when he sees those things, he knows that there is a craft or maybe more than one craft around, and that he will probably be having an experience that night. Charmaine, a lovely lady who's become a good friend of mine now, in England, near Brighton, southern England. And these are some of the beings that she has. They look like they're not very friendly, but she has a lot of communication with them, and they're unusual for ETs in the sense that they have hair. And then this is her reptilian frequent visitor, and she drew this smile on his face because she said he's always very upbeat and very positive and very enjoyable. And then she is, partly reptilian herself. And then this is one of the taller beings who looks very much like the little gray beings. And this one with the interesting triangular eyes. And Jujuli Kita, that name given by her star beings, used to be Carrie Barlow when I first met her a few years ago. She has a snake here, which she's very, very comfortable with. I don't know if it's a poisonous snake or not, but even if it were, she would be very, very comfortable with it. She works for the Humane Society in northern Phoenix, and she loves that work because in many, many cases, she's part of rescuing animals that are problematical to some of the people, but are really wonderful beings, as she considers them. And she is, she's the one who was seen in her bed having shapeshifted into her full reptilian form. And she said this is a beautiful rendition of her type of reptilians. I'd like to point out that the artist, the name down here, Kasara, does wonderful forensic work in regard to extraterrestrials, that any of us can describe the extraterrestrials we've had encounters with. And if we've seen them enough times to really remember what they look like, if we describe them to Kasara, she will draw them and keep on drawing and drawing and erasing and changing until she's got the likeness that we say, that's it. That's exactly what that being looked like. And she turns out to be, which I didn't know for many years that I've known her, she turns out to be a hybrid as well. And it's not surprising. And these are other beings whom Jujuli has experiences with. And she said they're really from a somewhat higher dimension than we are. And they're very loving. I think that the artist here has conveyed that sense of being very peaceful, kindly, loving beings. These, I think, are Arcturians. And then there's this Z-Kurg, that apparently is the name that he gave her, more of a gray alien type. And to me, these beings and these depictions look pretty stern, but according to these hybrids, they're very loving, but they don't have the facial musculature that we humans have. So we just might not pick up on that kindly, loving nature so much as we see these pictures, but they do exude a kindly, loving feeling. And then the dolphin-like beings, like this being, actually, you can see it's put here with dolphins in the picture. It's a dolphin-like species, but of course it's a different whole form. And this is an Arcturian being. Several of them have Arcturian, blue Arcturian beings in their nature. And I think this picture really captures that loving, benign, kindly nature that these hybrids describe. And then part of her is reptilian. Kasara had done this picture. You can just sort of see the top of the reptilian head and the front of the face, the mouth, the nostrils peeking out from the cloak. And I can't tell you how many times I have regressed people and they've described a reptilian being who has this very high collar. Some of us call it a Dracula collar. And very often sort of hides most of the face. And I think that may be purposeful, that they know that we humans get really spooked about certain kinds of beings, particularly reptilian. And so they may just want to soften the negative impact by sort of hiding their face to that extent. And then Jujuli has beings that look like this wonderful being in the 2002 crop circle. Linda, I was so glad you brought that out. That there's so much that can be said, but the point of showing this is that that is really one of the kinds of beings that our hybrid Jujuli has frequent contact with and has as part of her genetic makeup. So now we have this wonderful woman, Cynthia Crawford. She's the one whom I very first did that double take and said, hope you don't mind my saying it, but you remind me of a hybrid. And she does these wonderful sculptures of many different types of extraterrestrial beings. She says that she channels the sculpture. She has the clay and she's working away, and she keeps getting the descriptions through her mind from the beings, of those kinds of beings in each case, and will keep working on it with this guidance coming telepathically through her until the being says, that's it, that's right, you've got it. And then she sells those sculptures for an amazingly low price, in my opinion, and people really have the most remarkable experiences. She says it's because these ET beings actually, through her, are imbuing these sculptures with their essence. And so when a person will buy one of these sculptures and take it home wherever they live, they will very often get in touch with her afterwards and say, oh, the most remarkable thing happened. Some people even get healed from contact with one of these sculptures. Some get messages, some get all kinds of inspirational experiences from them. And she has experiences frequently with this glowing being. He's so glowing, according to her, that sometimes she can hardly see the being himself. And she has experiences with Sekhmet. Now, Sekhmet, interestingly, was one of the ancient Egyptian goddesses, and apparently is really one of the extraterrestrial species, sort of a lion-like. Maybe this is even a hybrid species with a human female body and a lion head. And then the little gray alien, actually, she said this is a tall white Zeta being who are very, very positive beings, according to her and some of the others. And then this is a tall white being. Some of you have been familiar with the work of Charles Hall, who kept meeting with the tall white beings out in the Nevada desert. And this is one of those. So they visit people and are very inspiring as well. So I'm just finishing now with the book that all of this information, so much more than what I've been able to tell you, and testimonies from these 8 hybrids, that's all in there. And I will be down very shortly in the vendor room. Be happy to talk to any of you. And thank you so much for your wonderful attention.